Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a special bonus edition of Turnip's Digest. We are streaming quite unorthodoxly on Saturday evening, but for very good reason. I am joined by a very esteemed group of American gentlemen who shall go nameless for the purpose of this roundtable, but still very esteemed, very talented nonetheless. How are you all doing?
Are we remaining nameless? This is the nameless thing?
Yes.
You guys are all nameless. Hello and welcome. I'm Cinderman Villager. I'm not nameless. You know me. I'm infamous at this point.
So
I have 6 conversations to have about this, but thank you for joining us for this weekend with Ryan Turnip.
You're not taking over. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well.
Wonderful.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. How are the rest of you doing?
Doing well.
Very good.
Enjoying the finest company.
Wonderful.
1,
So,
2, 3, 4. We have 4 gentlemen.
one of the, as I'm sure people who might be keeping up on Twitter or something like that have surmised, we are in the same location. I streamed earlier this morning with Thomas and Paul Fahrenheit.
That's right.
We have been enjoying a very lovely weekend, and it has been absolutely splendid for morale purposes. I think it's fair to say that we all have rather high hopes for the future.
100%. I've never bummed more cigarettes from anyone but Paul 777. That's the squares. It's fantastic.
So, I'll start off with a personal anecdote, and we can take from there. Like I said, this is just a very laid-back, normal conversation. The online audience is rather secondary to this, quite hilariously. I had very high hopes coming to this. I don't want to say impromptu because I had plenty of advance warning, but it wasn't like a very major formal event. It's been far surpassed any expectations that I had, which, as I mentioned, were quite high. We've had a wonderful time in the natural American geography, I guess you could say. I don't know if it's quite wilderness, but it was.
This area of the place that we're in is quite wild.
Okay, all right. Well then,
it's savage wild.
We can call it the fine American wilderness. It's been very beautiful. The company has been splendid. I was, by the donation of our very gracious host, I've had my first cigar. Very enjoyable.
You've also
and my second, yes.
You've also had your first Italian beef.
That is true.
You're
yes.
absolute Chicago Italian beef, and that's better than like a cigar. Like fuck off with that. Oh wait, we're not doing swears.
So, anyways. We've had quite the representation across the various geographies of America. Food's been splendid. The mannerisms, I think, have been not only entertaining but very valuable. I hate the left for coming up with the diversity is our strength thing, because now people automatically rubber band in the other direction and demand complete uniformity. I like the variation in American regions and the mannerisms that it produces and the various politenesses that come along with it. And it's been on full display the last couple of days. Very enjoyable. So, does anyone else have any impressions? Because I've given my very stellar review of the.
I got attacked a bunch this weekend for my mannerisms.
What about you? What have you been thinking?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was invited here last minute. Didn't know I was coming till Wednesday. Someone dropped out, so I just came. And the opportunity, I heard the names being dropped out, who's going to be at this event. I was super stoked, obviously.
Very good.
And the voice that's talking right now came to the Nashville event.
Yeah, of course.
So he's a Nashville guy. He's one of us.
And I believe you too were there.
Yes, I was. And that same feeling I had at the U.S. event is filling me again now. I am incredibly hopeful for the future, and it's been a wonderful gathering of people again.
And if either of you two have any comment, by all means.
Our victory is clearly inevitable at this point. So we have a large group here of very aristocratic men who are definitely the vanguard that we seek to cultivate.
It's not me though.
We will win.
But that's the impression that I was trying to give off. Very well stated, I think. There's just been a general atmosphere of optimism that I can't quite encapsulate into words. You would have to be here, much like you would have to be at the U.S. event to know the feeling.
No, you have to be wet cell to understand.
Okay, so
Well, I can't say that here.
Well,
I can't say Wetzel here.
As has been alluded to, we've been on the water. We've been on land. Some people refuse to get into the water. Some people.
Does he have a name on the internet?
No.
You don't have an internet name?
Calm down.
Gentle.
Calm down.
I am calm.
So, all that being said, we had this as a open, free-flowing discussion. I thought it'd be very fitting as sort of not conclude because we still have tomorrow, but conclude the evening sections of our small gathering here. So we've been having quite a lot of surprisingly intellectual discussions for what was marketed to me as just a nice gathering of friends, which may sound like I'm disparaging it. Quite the opposite. It was a very pleasant surprise.
It's very unavoidable with
Right.
the caliber of the men are here. That like we have a wide variety of like religious affiliations, and we're not afraid to get into it.
Right.
In terms of that, but at the same time, it's not like argumentative.
Right. Yeah. We've had the Protestant Catholic divide. We've had the Luthero-Papist versus everyone else divide, as the Eastern Orthodox tell me in my audience.
The fundamental contradiction.
And it's only been 2 days.
Yeah. So
also, you have to dip the sandwich. You can't not dip the sandwich.
So we've had quite a lot of discussions along those lines. We've also, if you caught the stream this morning, we had quite a lot of military discussion just due to some of the expertise of the individuals here. Thomas, Paul, a couple other people, very knowledgeable in what they do. And if you have the talent, you might as well use it. So that's just a little facet of what we've been inundated with the past couple of days. So, gentlemen, by all means, your thoughts. I've sort of just led us down this path, but I'm sure that I'm not the only one that has thoughts about this wonderful event that's happened.
Well, I would quickly say that the contingent you talked about is still down at the fire talking.
Right. So we aren't joined by everyone, which should be clear, but that's it.
Well, I was unable to participate in the religious discussions we were having earlier today because honestly, I had only rekindled my faith recently.
Okay, very good.
To the U.S. event. When I was there, it was almost a spiritual experience, and watching you sing in the morning there was incredible.
And I guess that's something that we have planned for tomorrow morning as well, as another round of psalm chanting.
Oh, excellent.
So, yeah, if you weren't at the U.S. event, and I believe this made quite a lot of reviews, was that we did a psalm chanting where started off with a small group of about 4 of us on Sunday morning at the U.S. event. We just started chanting psalms in a manner that has since been lost to most of American Christianity. And by the end of it, we had a group of, what would you say, maybe 30, 40 people chanting psalms. It was brought tears to my eyes by the end of it. And thankfully, we get to recreate that with our very tight-knit group tomorrow morning, the Lord's Day. For some people, probably already the Lord's Day at if you're in Eastern time or, God forbid, across the ocean. Right. But rekindling faith, that's a very interesting thing because a lot of people were talking about how spiritually serious everything was. And it's very, very heartening to hear that someone's faith was rekindled by the event. So could you, is there a story behind it?
Well, it's more of like my church that I've been going to since I was born kind of really liberalized and kind of just made me disillusioned. And for several years, I did not attend church.
All right.
So I was at the U.S. event, and it led to me finding a new church and attending it every weekend. So
very good. Would you what church might that be, or is that
Presbyterian?
All righty. So
Presbo.
Yeah.
Presbo, bro.
Presby in the house.
The guy and I, Athos and I went to the Presbyterian event last weekend. Yeah. We went to Doug Wilson's event with a friend of ours from the event, if you knew it.
So what this event, if I could summarize really quickly, it was sort of a more mainstreamed yet conservative Christian event that was focusing on localism, if I understood it correctly.
Yeah, 100%.
Pretty explicitly Christian nationalist.
Right, and I couldn't make it because that was my first couple of weeks of school, unfortunately.
But you were invited.
I was invited.
And you turned it down.
I did turn it down. So if you wouldn't mind, what did you take away? Because it seems to me that you were sort of on the outside, if that's not unfair.
Absolutely, because I mean, we came from the group we came with came from the U.S. event, which definitely had more of a political leaning, even though it definitely had spiritual overtones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think that's something uniquely American as opposed to like the European idea of
Very much
right wing.
uniquely American, because Europe is basically a post-Christian state at this point.
Well, also, I would interject quite quickly and say that like our subgroup, because we had two groups that went. So Oros went, and Salacious Slinky Camp went. So if you're part of the group, if anyone listening is part of the group, you know these people. Also, Okra went, and that was like the distinction. But I met Athos. I met Athos from the event, and we formed a triad.
All right.
Well, I was just going to point out at the event, like we came from like the political side, and at the event,
that's right.
I was actually very surprised about the Christian national sphere, how actually they did internalize a lot of the what's elite theory, I'd say.
Right.
It was actually like we need leaders, and like they're actually localism was like, getting the right man in the right place,
right,
as opposed to like general platitudes.
If you aren't American and if you haven't been paying attention to the sort of religious scene in the United States, it's very easy to miss. A lot of the more conservative or right-wing Christians have been radicalized, much to our benefit. And they have internalized the fact that their government is against them, which is something we've been talking about for years now. And they are actually taking action. They are organizing, and they are trying to rectify this situation. So,
am I the only one here that has a problem with the term of Christian nationalism?
Okay, that's a discussion for later. I have a few friends that write specifically under that term, and I personally, as baggage, but I don't think it's unfair of a characterization for what they're going for. We could discuss that, though, if you want to.
Yeah, well, I don't disagree with the idea on its face. But
right.
I mean, like, what do you mean by, like, Christian nationalism? Because, like,
right.
A nation is fundamentally derived. People use the term, like, ethnonat, and
right.
That's very redundant because nationalism is derived from the Greek word ethnos. And so, like, what are you talking about in terms of a nation if it's not like a group of people? And like a shared theology is one thing, and I don't disagree with that. Like I do. The church is universal, and I would like it to be resolved within all nations. But that's the thing; it's all nations,
right? So
that each nation is distinct.
A couple of the friends that I have been working with, especially since Christmas of this year. And also myself, I have an unpublished article on Christian nationalism that I just don't have a venue which would be good for publishing it right now. The working definition that me, and a bunch of others go off of is not specifically that we need to like redefine the nation to be centered around some sort of like puritanical, English Commonwealth system, which is what comes to mind for most people. Like if you say Christian nationalism, they think like either 50s evangelicals that want to bring Old Testament law into the legal system, or they think Puritans.
Well, what it makes me think of is honestly like a variation of civic nationalism.
And that's typically where the 50s evangelical one leads. But what Christian nationalism is advocating for is just explicitly stating sort of the Christian nature of the country, which in American
wonderful.
Right. And so that's where the downsides of the term comes from, because it has much more baggage than what I just articulated.
Yes.
But then the upside is that it's already established. So it's a trade-off. It's much like you still have people like Mr. Carson defending the word liberal in the sort of classical European definition. And that's an argument that a bunch of people come on the opposite side of him. In this case, with Christian nationalism, I don't think that it's worth abandoning it, because if you do, you have to completely redefine yourself. You have to redefine your movement. And you basically just have to start over with the infrastructure, and the people that would be your allies don't necessarily know that you're articulating. We want the same things, but through a different lexicon, which is why we keep the word.
To bring it back a little bit to the American heritage, like America has always fundamentally been a Christian nation, and I know that terminology has some baggage behind it by itself. But like the So, like, the separation of church and state doctrine actually isn't inherent in the Constitution.
Right.
It's Congress shall make no law.
Right.
I can't remember the rest of the words off the top of my head.
Respecting an establishment of religion.
Yeah, so, but at the time that was written into the American Constitution, literally every single state in the Union had a very explicit within the state constitutions to be Christian.
Right, yes. And in fact, we had established churches until I think it was 1832, if I remember correctly. That was when Massachusetts was disestablished, around there.
That sounds about right.
1830s at the least, I know that for certain. That was the last disestablishment in the United States. So we have this history of having these sort of state churches just because Congress didn't establish them. That would have been the states.
Which is where we have a lawyer amongst us right now, and I'm curious about your opinion on this. That I don't actually think that the First Amendment clause about the establishment of church and state can actually be incorporated because it's explicitly saying that Congress shall make no.
So that is in as much the case as far as you're purely reading the First Amendment, but at least the incorporation argument states that the 14th Amendment, which is its own amendment, and since you're amending the Constitution, you can contradict the First Amendment. The argument would be that the 14th Amendment intended to incorporate it, notwithstanding, and indeed directly because of the fact that it explicitly ties Congress, not the entire state apparatus.
Right. Which is how you can go for so long after the establishment of the Union, having established state churches. Because originally there is no contradiction.
Correct.
And whenever you get into incorporation, which for those that don't know, with the 14th and then the 5th, if I remember correctly, you get the argument that, well, this stuff that was just prohibiting the federal government can actually be applied down to basically laws affecting individuals. So you can incorporate...
Specifically, it can be applied to state governments.
Right,
the
yes.
Constitution originally did not bind state governments.
But apparently the Second Amendment doesn't work that way.
Well, I mean, it changed with the 14th Amendment. Congress, at least as the courts have interpreted it, intended to bind state governments for historical reasons, since they had some rather unruly state governments back right before the 14th was adopted immediately after the Civil War. Congress made the decision, and the several state legislatures that were definitely not under any duress ratified the decision to apply the Bill of Rights, essentially, to the state governments and bind them where theretofore they had not been bound.
Right, and then there's obviously a very, if you are saying that we are the inheritors of like the great English tradition of their specific judiciary, this seems like a revolutionary act, not in the good sense, like an upending, if you will.
Well, I would characterize it more as a counter-revolutionary act. The revolution being countered being the American Revolution.
All right. Well, I meant revolutionary in sort of like the more Bolshevik term, not the way that most Americans would conceive of it. But back to Mr. Wilson's event. Did you have any other observations?
Well, yes. About that point was just that, like, I brought up the point. I was like, what ultimately, if this event succeeded entirely, what would our goals be? And I didn't see anyone bring this up, but my point was to actually give the church political power. Because, like, I mean, our entire Constitution, the idea is the separation of powers. And the fact is, it's based off Montague's observation of, like, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. Whereas the only true separation is between, like, actual rival power structures, where, like, the state has some religious powers and the church has political powers.
Okay, right. Now, this might be strange because most people get taught in the mainstream history that Protestants are vehemently against the church and state being intertwined, which is, of course, a very useful tool for leftist historians because it basically takes the main population of the United States and pits it against itself, which hopefully by the fact that we are talking about Protestant churches being established in the United States should be obviously bull. But there was a long history of a lot of just Christians, like this isn't necessarily a sectarian thing, recognizing the fact that you don't just get state atheism and then the church gets to go play in the corner. You did get pronouncements from both on the other.
Well, a lot of the reason that the the original like 13 colony borders are derived the way they are is because you had various sects of people,
right?
Basically being run off from the colony, and like,
right.
You're not allowed to live here anymore.
New England specifically,
yeah.
and then
and
to a lesser extent, Pennsylvania. And
correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe specifically Rhode Island was basically like a Baptist like weirdo,
right?
In the sense of 13 colonies, where most of them were either like Anglican or something along those lines, and they were very explicit.
Congregationalist, yes.
They were either Anglican or Congregationalist, and they were extremely explicit about this
in
their state constitutions.
So, this event, when it was proposed to me, seems very hopeful. Having had people come away with it, there were some people saying it was much too normie, which is to be expected. It's a mainstream event. They can't just go out and just say everything that we want them to say in the first shot. Yes. So you can't just expect Doug Wilson to go out there and say everything we've been saying immediately, which you're working with what you have. But still good inroads for our guys, especially in the United States, who do care about Christianity playing a role in the lives of people, which hopefully most Christians would care about. Good inroads there for something to be done.
Well, yeah, no, of course it's great that they're restoring the notion of America as an explicitly Christian nation.
Right. And of course, there's a reason that most historians attack that idea so vehemently, is because that's the only anchor preventing them from just having another revolution like they had in the 60s.
But truly within the historical context, like it's basically unassailable.
Right. Yes. And that's our job basically, is to get that out there now that it's been so terribly extinguished, at least among my generation, where you don't get taught that at all, except by the people that you get told aren't reliable. So. That's the generation you are going to eventually have to work with.
But basically, at that point, you're saying that like Adams is unreliable. You're saying
right? Yeah, I understand, but like that's what people believe now, basically, especially in this generation. But we don't have to get too terribly bogged down in this discussion. It's just an event that happened. Promise here as well in our own little event. Any other thoughts, gentlemen?
Well, the two themes that we have touched on, first with rekindling and second with Christian nationalism, actually suggests a very interesting way to view the times we are in the context of a Christian nation like America. A rekindling is in fact a revival.
Yes,
and this cycle of revivals and then slacking off and then revivals again has been endemic throughout American history. And I think that progressivism, as it is manifest in America, is itself an aborted or maybe inverted revival. A constant refrain you hear in these circles is that progressivism is a religion, and it is a religious phenomenon, and it is an attempt of the American spirit to go through another revival. And this suggests to the men of our side that America is trying to have a revival. And it is incumbent upon us as a vanguard to lead a real revival in opposition to and in usurpation of this false revival in which we are currently mired.
Yes, and I wholeheartedly agree, and I'll use that to segue into something else. And it might seem silly throughout this event I've been mentioning, where I'm from in Oklahoma, we don't have hills. We get this one very specific flat geography, which is beautiful in its own right. You get to see this sort of almost English style of farmland, where you can see the old fences that separate these fields. You see the small houses of probably family-owned farms for who knows how long. We get that geography here. It takes me, roughly 3 hours worth of driving, and suddenly I'm in a completely new geography. It's these nice emerald green hills, these nice lakes and rivers, very beautiful. And I can't help but think this is something else that they don't really emphasize when they teach the new generation. It's something that they've been trying to extinguish from the old. So that what we are fighting for, especially the Americans, we do have a very beautiful country that has its own very beautiful history. And it's very much worth defending. So when you're talking about rekindling or reviving, this is something that needs to be at the focal point. It just takes one step out the front porch. And regardless of how mundane it is to you, if you've been living there for how long, or perhaps you've traveled and have the benefit of comparison, you can see how truly wonderful America is as a geographic entity, let alone history, religion, and political history. all these things that we are fighting to defend. I think the geography is something that gets underplayed quite a lot. And there's a reason for it. You get civic nationalists that will abuse that and just say, magic dirt theory. If someone comes here, then obviously they can be an American too.
But at the same time, the biological determinists will go too far
right
in the other direction. It's blood and soil.
Right. So
and these things synthesize themselves into a national spirit.
And that was I think it's about a year and a half ago now. I was arguing with with my good friend Yez on AA's channel about specifically if you are going to have this blood and soil theory of America, who do you limit it to? And I don't see that being necessarily coherent, being as it's sort of the amalgamation of Europe in this country. I don't know where you specifically draw the line and say, Germans are too swarthy to be
Benjamin Franklin.
right. So it doesn't seem quite consistent, and I think that you lose a lot in doing so. Obviously, you have concerns. Then you want to maintain a nation, presumably, so you have to make sure you have something in common. But I think that if you have just the amalgamation of Europe coming over here, it lasts for quite a long time, very amicably. You do some of the more WASP type people that I know, sort of last century progressives, people that will idolize figures like Wilson, will tell me that was an extreme detriment to the national unity of the country, just because now you have all these linguistic groups that have become enclaves. You have Germans in the Midwest. You have this sort of WASP elite in the South. You have this Puritan elite in the Northeast.
You do have this significant WASP elite in the South.
Not really.
It's so hot in the South. It's so hot in the South.
Right, okay.
Ladies, it's so hot in the South.
Anyways, you get all these different ethnic groups, and there are other ones as well. It's not just Germans and English. You also get Irish, Scotch-Irish in particular, which is the
Norwegians in the Midwest.
Right,
area.
Yep. Swedes in the New Jersey region, or in the Delaware region, which have now been, unfortunately, basically destroyed, completely obliterated. But I think you lose a lot if you just try to completely standardize all of that, and you lose a lot of what makes America such a beautiful, I don't want to say project, because that's a terribly subversive word that gets used, but a very beautiful occurrence.
It could be a project from the southern perspective, yes? Like you coming from Oklahoma and you coming from Tennessee could be a project, right? Could be a gray and gold project, perhaps.
I don't quite know.
Here's one of the problems with the American conception of itself is that we're a group of people who literally ran away from Europe in order to find religious freedom. And
for some, yes.
Yeah. And every time we came upon obstacles after that, we continued pushing westward in order to get away from that. So we have it's peak I just want to grill mentality. Yeah. And so there's nowhere to run now.
Right.
We're stuck where we are.
Yeah, we actually have to fix the problem now. Right.
We have to stand and fight, and that's kind of not inherent into the American spirit.
Right. And
the real American spirit is very expansionist and Faustian and constantly finding new territory. And now we're stuck here.
So here's the thing as well, or looping back to the sort of theme of revival. The point that I'm trying to get at here is if we do try to fix this, which is what I hope we are here to do, we also don't want to lose the plot. We don't want to fight. We don't want to make an America that doesn't exist and didn't exist. We want what should be, which puts us in a really unique position because we don't really have friends in the sort of the more hardline American nationalists that want absolutely everything to be sort of like a WASP cookie cutter form just across the country. We also have absolutely no allies with people that want just sort of the ethnic enclaves everywhere because now you don't really have a nation to speak of. So we're in this nice tension, which has made things terribly difficult for ourselves to work with.
Well, we're in a weird area that we're both a international empire. We're the seat of an international empire.
Right.
That stresses all the way through, we colonized Europe.
Basically.
And at the same time, America itself, the true heartland of America, is inherently and always has been from the beginning a minor imperial project. So like you're not going to find like a coherency between the Northeast and the Southwest.
Right.
I mean, there's a shared heritage and there's a shared idea going on there, but like they're disparate culture groups.
Right, and now perhaps we can see why the founders, regardless of how much foresight they had, ended up settling on federalism through one way or another.
Precisely.
Because for as much as I really, really like the idea, just to be politically real for a second, I don't necessarily think a confederacy would hold up for too terribly long. You get people that are saying balkanization is the way to go. I also don't see that as viable. That's a good way to just get killed a couple decades later.
Precisely.
Federalism in its actual sense, not the post-war between the states thing that we're left with, does seem to be the American way.
And we're actually pretty good at it, in all things considered. Like we are actually very good at like the culture in Florida has like its own thing going on, and the culture in the Northeast has its own thing going on, and we can all live very amicably with each other.
Right.
And so we kind of run into the Juvenilean problem of like the centralization of power.
Right.
And that they're trying to make it all into a cookie cutter thing, but at the end of the day, that's actually not a feasible idea.
Right, and I agree, which is why you kind of see it collapsing in on itself in both projects. One that's trying to make everything so terribly diverse that there's no entity at all to speak of, which would be your left right now. And then you also see the more hardline American nationalists, which might be inflammatory, but I don't think they really succeeded in the last century either. You had
what do you mean by hardline American nationalists?
So you had a very strict Anglicanization attempts of the German population in the Midwest, the Great Plains. I don't necessarily think that's turned out too terribly well, because instead of having a group that was very amicable towards the idea of the United States, at least in this time period, no longer anymore, just because their identity's gone completely. Perhaps that can tie into this. I don't know. I'm not going to make that case here. Whenever you do just force them to completely give up their heritage, you're not really left with an American population. Now it's a potential fifth column that you're really hoping is going along with the law. And now you're also causing, much in the same way that forced integration would a few decades later, you're also causing a lot of ethnic conflict where it wasn't hot beforehand. You have a lot of examples during the end of World War I where English citizens in towns would deface German cemeteries, whereas beforehand they were getting along perfectly fine. I don't think that the sort of nationalistic project there was a real success.
Well, I guess I would ask you. You said that didn't turn out terribly well, but as you also said, their identity has been obliterated, and they are. I mean, is there a hot ethnic conflict with Minnesota Germans and Minnesota Anglos? I don't.
Well, now is there a distinction between Germans and Anglos now anymore?
Well, no, and that's precisely the success of the nationalist project.
Well, is it? Because what is nationalistic about it now? I don't necessarily think that those two groups are just love the idea of America now. If we're looking at Minnesota, for instance.
I actually disagree with you on that one.
Okay.
In that there kind of is a distinct like Germanic identity as opposed to the Anglo identity that exists within America.
Right.
And you can see it in the regionalism as it's expressed.
You can. But I also don't think that it's too terribly meaningful, whereas once upon a time it was.
Well, it's precisely that lack of meaningfulness of that distinction that would be the object of the conformist project of the 20th century.
But presumably you would want that to the ends of like having a strong American nation,
yes.
Which is where I then say they failed.
Well, the conformist project ultimately boiled down to creating like a pseudo-progressive religion based around the founding fathers.
Yeah, okay. Perhaps, but anyways, that's my take on it, and that's why I'm saying that if we are going to revive something, you need to keep that tension between those two conflicting sides there. But that's at least my opinion. I'm not by any means the leader of this group. Yes, sir.
I was just going to add that, I'm a Catholic, and being a Catholic in the South, it's the racial component is almost incorporated into the spiritual component, because everyone, almost 90% of the people I've met are, Italians, Irish, French,
Poles.
a few polls,
Yeah.
but
One line
probably
in the
like,
woods.
but it's like, but in the marriage happens, within the church. That's where you meet everyone you've ever known your whole life.
Right.
So in that way, there's almost like a racial synthesis within the Catholic parishes between those three races.
That's really interesting because that was going to be my next question for Ryan. To what extent do you think our project should be, or could be, or will be ethnogenic? Are we?
So a lot of people on our side end up making it out to be like a choice.
Mhm.
You can choose between a religious identity or an ethnic identity, but that's very obviously not the American way.
Right, but I think his point is that the religious identity forms the ethnic identity
Right, yes.
over time.
Right, and I would agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And I think that's very obviously played out in the history of the U.S. at the very least.
Yeah.
So, and I think that that's also one of the keys to keeping that tension that we were talking about earlier between conformity and just ethnic enclaves, is that sort of the connectiveness of a religious identity. Because you can have, we can take the Catholics, you can have Poles, Irish, some South Germans, and various other Eastern European groups that do come together under Catholicism with the Lutherans, for instance, in the Midwest and part of the Great Plains, Germans, Swedes, Finns, Norwegians, all these people that would otherwise be very disparate. In the case of the Finns, having absolutely no common language or culture with the other ones, save for maybe some holdovers from Scandinavia. This religion does bring people together, and then over time, you can see an amalgamation of their identities into something more religious focused rather than.
I'm a living example of that. I am an amalgamation of 6 Catholic ethnicities.
Right.
It
And
literally happened to create me.
Right, and that's the other reason why I don't think you can center this around ethnicities, just because of the amount of I don't want to say intermixing because that's a negative connotation, but like the amount of shared heritage that one individual can have kind of precludes someone from just saying, well, if we're going to have a United States, it has to be English, and we're going to kick out everyone that's not English, and you're left with like 12 people.
The trouble with that is the English are now outnumbered by the Germans.
And
the Irish or the Italians.
I mean, they almost already were by the time that Benjamin Franklin made his quote about the swarthy Swedes.
Right. So, and this is why I don't think that race can be the core component. I'm not saying it's mutually exclusive either. I hope that you guys can reason that through.
Mm-hmm.
Both are needed. People in our spheres like to point to was it 1790 that the Immigration Act was passed?
Mm-hmm.
European Christian men of good character.
Mm-hmm.
It's not European or Christian men. It's all of it.
So this is interesting implications for the future of Christian nationalism in America, because to some extent, the First Amendment was guaranteeing the right to free exercise of religion and preventing the establishment of religion by Congress, was essentially a armistice between Christian factions.
Right. We don't want our own 30 Years' War.
Exactly. That's precisely what it was about, and we've since extended that purely intra-Christian armistice to every other faith that washes up on these shores. But given that faiths are generative to some extent of an ethnicity, and given the fact I'm assuming you're not going to be content with Catholic domination
An organized minority.
then we have to rebroker.
Minority.
We have to rebroker this armistice between the denominations and figure out what exactly Christian American nationalism is going to look like, given that we're not going to homogenize the Lutherans and the Methodists and the Baptists and the Catholics.
So tying back to two things, that's one of the things that made me so optimistic after the first event that we had in February and now this one, is because we can have all these different denominations come together and not only be neutral towards each other, but get along very nicely. And then we were also
actively supportive.
Well, yeah, actively supportive as well. And the other thing that we were talking about as well with the, I just lost my train of thought. Dang. Sorry. What? Can you repeat the?
Anyway, what we need to do is find a new modus vivendi among the American Christians to get along with each other, to support each other, to help each other. And we essentially have to reestablish the Peace of Philadelphia, I guess you call it.
So, right, that that is a goal, and I think that we've basically done that already.
Mhm.
The hard part, of course, would be getting it in writing if you need it to be, but I think that's a later battle.
Mhm.
If you could see the
Well,
chronology here,
yeah,
you don't want to.
I don't know if we want to approach this topic, but there's clearly a third faction here that is kind of problematic.
Okay, hold on, we'll get to that in a second. But with the Christian nature of all of this,
Mhm.
I have a hard time conceptualizing a serious political movement in the United States that is not Christian and also claims itself to be right wing.
Mhm.
Just because, especially if you want to broach that topic now, if you want to look at the various forms of paganism that have taken root in the United States, the vast majority of them a few decades ago would not be anywhere near right wing. I'm sure you could all name a few examples.
I wasn't referring to the pagans.
Oh, okay, all right.
But I don't know how to approach this on a amicable side, but
We can disagree. I'm sure that people cannot lose control.
The pagans are not a problem at all.
Right.
Nobody's actively oppressing the pagans right now.
Right.
Neither are the pagans actively oppressing anybody.
Right. Yeah. It's a non-factor. Right.
And well, actually, on that note, though, but like not to offend any of our like pagan listeners, but like the most of the pagans are like blue-haired, like basically explicitly Satanist type people.
Wicca, Satanists, Luciferians,
like sacrificing goats, but they're vegans, which is like hilariously weird.
It's a tofu goat.
Yeah, yeah, precisely. So like the pagans are not the issue at all in any way, shape, or form. But there is an explicitly anti-Christian faction that needs that they've been working on this project for a while in order to remove Christianity from American culture and try to propose an American nation that is explicitly like non-denominational,
secular.
Yeah, secular, and that's never been an American idea since its founding. And so, how do we get around that peacefully?
Well, my first instinct is to say just continue with what we're doing, and if they become a problem, then we'll deal with it then. If they don't become a problem, all the better. Because a lot of that's also going to be tied up in the people we're directly in opposition with, just with the nature of who we're fighting and all of that. Though I'm sure you could find people on the right that believe probably exactly the same thing, for better or worse. But if we don't have to come across them and fight with them, then we don't have to.
Well, here's one of the weird things, though, is so like you have the Muslim coalition existing within the Democrat party,
right? Yeah,
and like they're not a fan of the pride movement, as it were. And
supposedly, right?
No, and they really aren't.
Right, their politicians pay lip service, but that's out of necessity, right?
And so they have a certain leadership class, which I guess now we're getting into the elitism side of things. They have a certain leadership class that has basically thrown in with the pride agenda and what have you. But at the same time, they're not actually fans. Like if a gay guy goes walking through a Muslim neighborhood, he might get murdered.
Right.
That's a very real possibility.
Right. So my first instinct, and maybe you guys could add afterwards, my first instinct is to say that's a problem that can't be solved until we wield power, which means it's many steps removed in terms of solution.
Well, okay, let's think about that one. So let's say we did wield power. What would be a proposed solution that's non-aggressive?
Well, so this is what I was going to add about that topic. And I was going to talk about it earlier, but it was what is the nature that a church wielding power, what form would that take? If you look at pre-revolutionary France, the States General were the first to state the church. But then I look at America, and that's the question we always have to answer is, how are we going to actually? It's fine in France when you have the Catholic Church, it's one church, you have one representatives, but here's how many delegates do the Catholics get? How many delegations do the
Right. So if I'm to draw upon United States history, the solution there would to have it be informal again, because you don't go to a town and the town says in the charter very rarely, we're a Presbyterian town and we will, persecute anyone that's not Presbyterian. Typically what it is like that town is majority Presbyterian. Everyone goes to mostly the same churches. Everyone has the same elders and whatnot. And so that those elders and the pastor and all the congregants are able to exercise that sort of social informal power. And that's how it was with most churches here in the U.S.
Then the decentralized solution, as it were, is you empower a town to basically say, like, we're not allowed a mosque here.
Sort of like the states' rights.
In order to discourage those types of people
and you saw this happening in those towns, like Mormonism, for instance, was a problem that Christians had to deal with, and without for the states that didn't just opt to shoot them, typically what you would do is you would basically use all the legal means you could to bar them from building.
Very unfortunate that they didn't opt to shoot them all.
So, goodness.
Sorry.
But that's one of the things you can use, and that's being used today by various groups. Is you don't just formally say we are banning this group from doing anything. You just use your legal means and your informal control of the city or the politicians, the law, the zoning, and all this other stuff to basically just say, yeah, you can't build this unless you have this exorbitant amount of money, which you don't have.
Okay, so how do we undo the problem that we're currently existing under? Because we have basically the second constitution that I think you're all aware of what I'm referring to.
Mm-hmm.
And that empowers these people in order to create these establishments in a hostile town as like an outpost.
Right.
And those footholds need to be removed.
Yeah. And that, I don't have the answer right now. I know my limitations, and I'm not going to come up with something in thin air. I don't have the answer for what we should do. So
must be done.
Perhaps one of you guys.
By any means
I
necessary.
am confident that someone should do something.
That's good.
So, I have been toying around with this idea. I think most serious Christians would prefer to deal with the conservative variants of the other denominations rather than the sort of universalist liberal ones. And I think that the group that we have and the support, just support we've already built up informally without saying we need to support these groups. I feel like what we could work towards very easily is just supporting the conservative members of various denominations that we have. And if they can get their power back in those specific institutions, unless you're the Roman Catholic Church or the Episcopals or the Baptists, shouldn't be too terribly difficult. Most of these congregations are small and localized. You can start then, if they succeed, exercising influence over a town. Yeah. But there are problems in which I'm sure you're about to enumerate.
No. Actually, I was about to say the good news on that front is that our victory is inevitable. Because on the liberal side of the house of these various denominations, they're explicitly making efforts to drive off the congregation as quickly as they can.
They hollow out every church they capture just as they hollow out every other institution.
Right, and tomorrow the pews will sit mostly empty.
Yeah,
right.
So while they can pay for terrorists to burn down buildings in the short term, in the long term, eventually they're going to liquidate all the assets.
Right.
And there's no old rich people left anymore.
Right.
In order to pump funds into these.
They're basically their finances are ran on looting.
Yeah.
Which isn't sustainable.
Yeah, no. And so they have maybe 20 years at tops.
Well, the question is, will they kill us all first?
Long. Yeah, that's way too long. But at the same time, our victory is inevitable.
So
I'm not so hopeful.
There went the air of optimism that we were hyping up so terribly much at the beginning. But that was just an idea I was toying with, because just looking at this from a realist perspective, I have significant disagreements with the Roman Church, with the 39 articles of the Anglicans, with the Presbyterians, and with half of Lutherans. But if I'm looking at the hand I've been dealt, I would much rather deal with conservatives, the traditionalists, the actual Christians of each of those groups, than what we have with today, which is people with rainbow flags saying that they're Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Catholic, whatever the hell, when they are very clearly just Satanists. That might be a strategy, it might not be. I haven't, like I said, I've just been toying with the idea. I haven't written it down, haven't thought it through too terribly much, but I don't think we're here to solve all the issues tonight.
No.
Yeah.
Right, and anything else, gentlemen? Because we do have a lot to talk about, and it's up to you guys how long we go for. Just with how easily happy I am, how easily pleased I am. Like, I could talk about the geography out here all day. It's genuinely beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it absolutely is. And so that's actually another point that you kind of alluded to, is that there is a very real argument about like the soil that like cultivates the culture of the people that exists, which is kind of the problem with the American imperial complex, in that there's such a wide variety of like soil, but somehow America has always managed to sustain itself literally as an explicitly Christian nation throughout all these different diverse areas. And so diversity is our strength.
Now, Stephen and I did do a stream on the topic of diversity, but from the right-wing perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably one of my better streams. It was on liberty or equality. And the Canult Ladine, the Roman Catholic gentleman, makes the argument that like an actual true federalist system will result in people having regional differences, and that's a good thing. You don't want everyone to do everything. There is specialization that people need in order to function better. So if I go to the state of Georgia, for instance, and they're this one specific denomination, they have this one specific culture, and it lends themselves towards these customs, I have a hard time viewing that as a terribly bad thing. Just because that seems to be like what we're after, basically.
It's interesting, though, our contentment and indeed our joy and celebration of the different regional customs must necessarily have limits. You would not be excited about Georgians practicing child sacrifice.
Right. Yes. So and now we're back to that. Now we're back to that tension that we hashed out earlier.
So we need to, I guess, as part of our future project, think about how we want to rationalize the bounds within.
And that's what makes. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. That's what makes Christianity such a great thing, is because if regardless of the denominational splits, I don't think that the evil papists are doing child sacrifices in their so terribly papist temples. There's a natural limit there just by knowing, this state may be majority Baptist, this state may be majority Calvinist, this state may be majority Papist, to use the Protestant term.
There is one very specifically non-Christian group who's very explicitly on the side of pro-child sacrifice. And they've made it very explicit several times over this recent debate.
Well, aside from that particular group, looking back at American history, it's interesting as we discuss where these bounds are going to be set. The Mormons are an interesting example because, for instance, Massachusetts aside, they weren't killing Catholics. They weren't, but numerous states, as we've alluded to, I think, in conversations this weekend, did have statutes where it was legal to shoot Mormons.
Missouri specifically, it was an executive order from Governor Boggs, and he said that to preserve not the heritage, but sort of the stability in the community of Missouri, he not only legalized it, but encouraged people to shoot what he saw was basically a foreign religion invading the state.
Exactly. So in the case of the Mormons, you have an example of a foreign body, if you will, that the Christian body politic was not willing to accept, was willing to use violence to expel. And so it's informative to look at that as an example of what a future American Christian nationalist regime would have to deal with, as we have innumerably more foreign bodies grafted upon us in the last century.
Right.
Now, in defense of the Mormons, I know, very controversial. In defense,
might be the most controversial stance anyone's taken so far.
In defense of the Mormons, and I know that there's lots of problems with this argument, but
you just like looking at me.
Basically, what the Mormons are fundamentally is they're Freemasonry adopted into like Americana as a religion.
That's a fair statement, and you also have a very specific ethnic group that they're tied to. They're all majority English,
yes.
And that just adds into their foreignness, is because if you know their history, their first generation almost entirely died out on their march west. They had to send missionaries to England, who then immigrated over here freshly to join them.
Now, I know this is kind of debasing the conversation and get down to like rank utilitarianism, but I understand where the like polygamy came out of.
Right.
And they were the only people moving westward. Normally, when you moved west, it was like a group of like single males, like trying to make their fortune, and then basically a bunch of prostitutes followed them, and then eventually, like they created families with actual women.
Right. No one said they didn't have reason to do it. It's just that it was.
They had very valid reason because they were the only group moving entirely like intact families into the west, and then like the young male size shocker. You're running into a hostile wasteland. The young males are going to die,
right?
And so they needed a way to sustain and incorporate like the families left behind by these dead males, and that's where the polygamy came out of.
Right, and once again, no one said they didn't have reason. It's just most of us would find that heavily immoral and
absolutely
right. So
I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying that like again.
Right. So at that line, then I think most Christians, as they did, would draw the line and say this can't coexist in a Christian society,
which has proven itself out.
Right. Yeah. So I think that Christianity is just a inherently good framework to use, sort of as like the where do you draw the line, and specifically the conservative or the traditional variant, like I discussed earlier in the various denominations, is where you use that to draw lines. Because we don't want the 30 Years' War, so you have to have that inter-denominational conflict eliminated, but you also still need to be able to utilize it against outside forces, which is why you want the traditional variant and not the liberal variant that just is pacifistic, except if you become racist or something.
Well, this is where, in a great irony, that the lefties are kind of better at upholding our values than we are, because the neocon solution, which is absolutely a leftist ideal, is like, let's go crusade against the Saracens.
I mean, yeah,
but like, that's what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. We were crusading against Saracens.
But now you have the issue that is more close to home than perhaps what they were, wanting to go against, which then brings us back. How do we deal with that? Which, once again, still don't have the answer. And it's. You can make the same argument with the different other ethnic groups in the United States that people on the right like to get very edgy and LARPy about. What do we do with this group that doesn't have really any ties to where they came from and to here?
Okay, so
I don't know.
The reservation system worked.
Just to get off on a tangent, like I kind of hate the term LARPy because so there's an element of like hauntology behind it that like people are trying to recreate like 20th century ideals. But at the same time, these people are doing an honest effort to like try to live their values.
Okay, so we can draw that line, and the people that I alluded to that have these opinions, I don't think have any intention in the near future to repatriate people that have been here for 300 years.
Okay.
I don't, for whatever reason, I don't see people going out and doing that tomorrow. Now, I do agree it gets used as a hammer against our people if they say want to have like a normal family. Suddenly you get called a LARPer for like a different age, which is completely heinous. But I stand by my use of the word LARPer for repatriating groups that you can't repatriate tomorrow.
Well, not just can you not repatriate them, I don't think they're fundamentally American and they never have been.
Well, yeah, and then you have the other issue. Where would you send them?
Well, that's actually very easy to do.
Well,
if you decide to do it,
and perhaps if you want to discard morality behind it as well, because presumably you don't want them all to just die.
No, absolutely not.
So where do you send them?
There's plenty of places that actually like the people that we're describing. They're of actually above average quality in terms of world terms.
Right, yes.
And so as a population, they'd be very integratable to like 90% of the world. And they would actually be able to uplift that area of the world.
Okay.
In terms of where the quality of life is there currently versus like what it could be like. It's not going to be great, but it is going to be.
Yeah, but how do you procure their entry to?
Right, that was the next issue. Yeah. Whenever these ideas were being originally articulated, the place they'd be repatriated to was uninhabited mostly. Not so anymore.
Okay, well, how does the U.S. government make anyone do anything? How the hell did the U.S. government manage to make?
So yeah, no, it can be done, but I'm asking, is it worth it at that point? Like, is there not a better solution?
Well,
Which that's a genuine question. That's not rhetorical.
No. What counter solution do you have?
I don't.
Okay, so like this is a not unreasonable solution. I know this gets into like touchy subjects. That but it's not unreasonable. Like actually, Liberia is actually better for the people that were sent to Liberia.
Yeah, I understand. It's just like, but at the time that happened, it was very easy to do that.
So now it's going to sound brutal, but this is actually the way the U.S. government operates on a daily basis. So like, all you have to do is say that like, we're not going to ship you grain anymore if you don't do this, and they will kowtow tomorrow.
Right.
And I know that sounds brutal, but at the same time, like, let's look at what the U.S. is actually doing, and it's kind of insane. Like we're shipping grain down into Africa in order to sustain their population, in order to like uplift the people, quote unquote. But like, if you have 100 starving Africans and you ship an unlimited supply of food down there, you get 1,000 starving Africans. Like, how is that world actually made better? And that's currently what we do right now.
Right.
So all you have to do is say like, we're gonna cut off the food shipments unless you like take these people, and they will take these people, and it will improve the quality of life down there because the people that we're talking about sending actually are above the average down there.
Right. Now, how well would they be accepted is the thing, because you said they would be well accepted in most areas in the world, but if that's true, surely we wouldn't have the issues that we have right now. Obviously, there's a bigger gap here, but I don't think that's the sole reason why we have the issues we do.
Well, part of the reason we have the sole issues that we do is there's a propaganda campaign by the ruling elite explicitly against the heritage Americans, as it were.
Right.
And then you get into like Ted Kaczynski's like the greatest trick the system ever pulled.
So that seems to me to be more the major problem rather than just their geographic juxtaposition.
Well, it's both, and you don't have to like. I'm getting into like some brutal sounding things, but I'm not.
Well, no, you're giving a very real analysis of what the U.S. government does. So by all means, please continue.
Yeah. So like the greatest trick the system ever pulled is that we just recently had a man going on an anti-white rampage in Memphis. And like that's not an accident.
Right.
That's a consistent propaganda campaign that has been waged on that population.
Right. I mean, they're basically inhumans if you were to take the propaganda as its word.
For like 50 years. That it's just acceptable to go out and like kill white.
Yeah.
And that wasn't actually a problem like in previous generations. And that wasn't even a propaganda thing, because in a way, that population was more integrated into the society around them in a better way. And it's a very paternal relationship, which creates a bit of resentment, but at the same time, like it is a sustainable relationship.
Okay. So, but once again, this seems to me more of a major problem than just considering repatriation.
Well, it's a major problem in terms of that you have the American elites creating a propaganda campaign in order to basically do the Juvenelli and high-low versus middle thing, which is not sustainable at all, because you end up with the Soviet Union, you end up with the George Orwell, like the Poles are allowed to do whatever the hell they want. And this wasn't an accident in the Soviet Union that like the lumpen proletariats were allowed to like just murder random people from the middle class. And that's where we are right now.
Right. With that, I don't think that we're necessarily going to get too terribly much farther, just because we don't really have I think we're in the right state of mind to deliberate what the silver bullet to this issue is.
Well, I mean, if you just stop the propaganda campaign, that's
right. Yeah, like, and that's what I'm advocating. Is I think that's the main thing that you should be focusing on, rather than the what I deemed as LARPing earlier.
Yeah, once the propaganda campaign and the constant social pressure to stir up conflict recedes, then a large part of the problem will be dealt with just there.
Right.
I mean, the population we're discussing has lived alongside white Americans for going on 400 years now, and in the places where historically they lived cheek by jowl, they had developed folkways
Right.
to live together in, if not joyous harmony, then at least a tolerable peace.
Right.
And a return to those folkways is, I think, a more realistic solution than some kind of scheme to forcibly replace.
And the reason that you can name specific acts of violence during that period is because they were exceptions.
Yes.
The reason that you know them in the history books by their names is because they were so terrifying, because that just wasn't what happened. Whereas today, in 5 years or so, I doubt you could name to me specifically who was the name of the Memphis shooter.
Yeah.
Not only were they exceptions though, it was most of those incidents were explicitly instigated by the journalist class.
Right. Yeah. That's the other route you can take.
Was it Tulsa that had the race riot? That basically it wasn't really a problem, except that you had the white newspaper and the black newspapers, and they both tried to instigate.
And it turns out it's really good for business if you can stir people up into a violent frenzy.
Yeah, and there was no reason for that to actually happen the way that it did, were it not for the newspapers.
Right, and so you can take that either way you want to. Either the trial went the way it should have, in which case fine, or it didn't go the way it should have, in which case it's another trial in which something failed.
But this is
not something that's worth burning down half a town over.
Yeah, and this is something that's basically instilled into the elite playbook of America at this point, because the Rodney King riots were very similar.
Right.
They burned down LA because of nothing.
Right, because of the media. Right.
Yeah, because the media told a certain population that it was okay to go out and burn down the city. And it's not like those areas are better off for it. They're objectively worse off.
Right.
As Thomas Sowell points out, basically, if you in the 1950s, there was prosperous black communities all across America in pretty much every major city that had a large black population.
Right.
And then something happened, and they've all disappeared.
Right. So. With that being said, we'll let everyone else infer what you can from that. I'm sure we can pick that up at a later date, probably also on this channel if it comes to it. But back to something more pressing to what we've been dealing with in the past couple of days. We've talked about the geography. We've talked about religious framework. There's something else that I wanted to talk about as well, and it's there is a different look and a different feel to the people that you see around here compared to what you'll see in the cities. And this is a very well done point. Obviously, there is a rural-urban divide, but I think there's something more to it, and that you can still see, gone as parts of it may be, you can still see vestiges of that old American system that we're talking about by the rural, white trash, terrible Southerners that you see in different parts of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Georgia, Alabama, Virginia, if Paul Fahrenheit's to be believed. And I'm sure you can take this into the Midwest, the Northeast, and all this other stuff. And I think this is a great point of optimism, because that stuff isn't entirely gone. We're not building from the ground up. In fact, we still have vestiges to work with. Any thoughts, gentlemen?
Oh yeah, everywhere you go, that people have let's call it just Southern sympathies. They're great people. And
it doesn't even necessarily have to be Southern. If you're in the Great Lakes region, I don't expect them to be waving Confederate flags. But if they still have their own,
be very incorrect.
I know there are some.
There are more Confederate flags flying in Michigan than in the entire South.
But I would expect their culture to be different. Mm-hmm. I think that's a fair characterization. Hopefully, okay. So
this is why I tried to characterize it as Southern sympathies. That people who are not afraid of the rebel flag,
right?
They tend to be very friendly people. They tend to even if you meet some random person on the street, they will invite you into their home for dinner if they have those kinds of sympathies.
Right. And so we're not it's not like we've collapsed entirely. Don't get me wrong, our situation is dire, but it could be worse, as terrifying as that may sound.
Worse than Jay Dyer.
We could be working with what the Europeans are working with right now, where not only is your old identity almost entirely wiped out to where there's only a few houses left of the original version, but you're post-Christian, you don't even have the religion still. Everything has been subverted. You have to completely build from the ground up, and there's no coherent identity with which to build from the ground up. You have people that have different interpretations that split in mutually exclusive directions. we have disagreements here. Like we talked about, we have different religions and all this other stuff, but somehow, first time that we met at the event, a bunch of strangers online managed to come to a very amicable solution of we like each other.
Mm-hmm.
So our differences aren't mutually exclusive then, which is a point of optimism, I think.
No, and actually that's a point that should be stressed very hard, is that so on the internet, people get into weird autistic debates about very particular things, but the second you like meet somebody face to face, most of those weird autistic disagreements disappear in a heartbeat.
Right.
Because like we have
Normal human behavior kicks in.
it's not just normal human behavior, but like at the end of the day, our goals are the same. And this is where the internet is very toxic, because people enjoy getting likes. They enjoy getting like the attention, they enjoy the upvotes, whatever you want to call them. And like there's a number that they can quantify.
Right.
Like,
And
this is awesome. Like that was a good take.
I'll use my own personal shortcoming for this. Online, it is very easy for me to get hot-headed towards, say, Paul Fahrenheit. In person, it is very difficult for me to get hot-headed at Paul Fahrenheit just because it is completely different. And this has been discussed ad nauseum. You have just a still picture and set text, and you have a character limit. You can't convey tone very well unless you have a masterful grip of diction, which no one uses Twitter for that. So
Aaron McIntyre does a good job.
Yeah. So whenever you finally meet our people in person, you don't have the urge to be so contrarian with your hot take opinions, because it turns out, we like each other. We're friends.
Yeah, which I know this is a very stale take, but like if you have the opportunity to like politic in your local area, like get out in your local area and politics.
Right, yeah. we don't have to be limited. This isn't the set group that we have to work with forever.
No.
We can go from here. It turns out we can be productive. We can like restore things, which some of us are working towards.
Indeed. And,
we are doing something.
Yes. And as we do things, we need to move and are moving ever more off the internet and onto online. And so we bring it back to this weekend and where we started. We need more of this. We need more branching out into online, out of online, and into in real life. It doesn't even have to be activism, just doing things together, starting ventures together.
Building social capital with your neighbors.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And I don't want to run over too terribly long. I don't know where you guys are at, but I think that we jokingly discussed that our last topic would be, of course, the necessity of breaking bread with your neighbor and the wonderful connections and bonds that brings about.
Oh, the segue.
I get good at it over a certain amount of time. And then, after you write a few closing statements just on the spot, you get really good at finding segues, perhaps where they're terribly written. So, but this is important. Matthew, the Prudentialist, he does a very wonderful job at lining this out on his channel, and a little bit of tangential things that spring forth from that, like mentorship, all the those sort of educational. I don't like that word; it's not strong enough. But anyways, those sort of educational relationships that you can have, and those sort of strong bonds that you can have, because people in our spheres are very, very talented. That is one of the things that we absolutely have working in our favor. We have professionals in who knows how many different fields of it, how many different disciplines, and how many different specialities. And we have people that are able and willing to learn. So, of course, it is only natural that mentorships develop, informally or formally. And that's just one aspect. We haven't even talked about dinners. We haven't talked about recreational activities. We haven't talked about service activities for communities and all this other stuff. All wonderful things that can build bonds, or just political organization, which is something that a few people are working with, multiple groups are working with, rather, I think it's fair to say. So, gentlemen, your thoughts, by all means. I mean, you two haven't...
Sure. Well, I mean, this shared experiences is all a relationship really is. If you're not building those, you're not even living your life. We're all friends in the sphere. Just get out there, man.
Right.
Get out there and start weaving with your friends. It's the best thing that ever happened to me.
Right. And more to your point, especially, like, we aren't advocating anything revolutionary or uncomfortable. This is what humans naturally do.
Right.
And it's been suppressed by everyone evil.
Touch grass level.
Yeah. Clean your room.
Yeah. We are once again requested that somebody do something. So, any other thoughts, gentlemen?
I think you'll actually be very surprised because our ideas have been propagating into like the normosphere very much.
Right.
Like not too
Well,
long.
that's why the dissident right is dead now.
No, I had a wonderful conversation not too long ago. I was at a dog park, and like I can't hack my power level that well. Like politics comes up every time I have conversations with normies, and this dude was dropping very normie boomercon takes and talking about like Jordan Peterson and things like that. And then all of a sudden, out of left field, he's like, "So Pareto and the circulation of elites," and he started like lecturing me on Pareto for like 5 minutes.
Sincerely.
Yeah, sincerely.
Like just a random guy
Yeah.
at a dog park.
Yeah. And
what are the odds?
and I
In
let
a state, you would not expect that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I let him go through his spiel, and he got to the end of it, and he would like wasn't sure what conclusions to come from, but all he knew is that like there's always going to be a small group of elites in charge, and basically all I had to say was like, well, the least we can do is like remove the ones that hate us and put ones that are friendly to us. And he was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense."
Right. Back at home, one of the elders in my church is a school teacher. I'm definitely the more conservative bent. And he just basically came up with that, but in very sort of colloquial terms. Like he was basically just saying, like, you always have someone at the top and someone at the bottom, which is just someone saying you have hierarchy. And of course, hierarchy definitionally means someone at the top, someone at the bottom, right wing, organizational. So, people are catching on to this. Fertile ground for recruitment. They aren't, and it's not like you have to make compromises either, like with those terrible coalitions, because they want what you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, that I feel happy tonight, and so I have no problem dispensing with optimism into the audience here.
Our victory is inevitable.
Right.
What's that?
So, anything else, gentlemen? I don't want to leave.
Thank you for this opportunity to appear on a stream. It's been very interesting being on the other end. I'm typically exclusively a content enjoyer, not a content contributor. So thank you very much.
Yeah, hopefully everyone enjoyed. This was nicely impromptu. We had half of our potential panel fade away as you do with your carousing and revelry. But I'm very happy that we did this and did not call this off. I think this is very beneficial, and I'm now much more happy, I suppose you could say. So with that being said, everyone, we did have a couple of super chats, I believe. We'll get through those very quickly. Cringe Walker for 5 United States dollars. One small thing that can be done is overthrowing Everson versus Board of Education, allowing U.S. states to declare their own local official religion. I'll let the
can be done. I mean, sure. That would be quite a heavy lift with the current makeup of the Supreme Court. And if you're talking about doing it outside of the judicial fiat, then Brandon's been talking about maybe overturning judicial review. Maybe that could work to our favor.
I thought that was based in right wing overturning judicial review.
I mean. Debate who's doing the overturning.
they did Dobbs, so I mean, like
whom?
So, and then we have Prince of Parma for 35 Zuid-African rand. Wherever they are sent, they are strongly disliked. No one likes pioneers regardless of their origin, and that's basically the point that I was trying to get at.
Would that extend to the Voortrekkers then?
Absolutely.
I don't think he's South African, so I think the jab might be lost there, but it could. I mean, it's objective. They weren't really liked by the other. They weren't liked by the English, and they weren't liked by the natives, except for in the 60s. If I remember correctly, I believe it was Vervoord that got the title of bringer of rain from a few of the tribes there. Like that's funny, but like it's genuine. He did good things for them, so. I guess it's an ebb and flow. It would be how I'd characterize it, but maybe there's a. Okay, all right.
It comes back to the propaganda question.
So, with that being said, I believe we are done. If you all like what has happened here, please do consider supporting. The link is in the description, and I am very, very grateful for any support that anyone does give, monetary or otherwise. very grateful is all that I can really say. And with that, Thomas and I don't know if Paul was necessarily on board, but Thomas did say that there is a potentially he'd be up for streaming tomorrow morning. So be on the lookout for that.
Drag Ace out of bed. And make him
I might drag Ace out of bed because he snoozed through the wonderful discussion we had this morning.
Ace's loud sound epicenter takes on Bach.
So with that being said, everyone, have a good evening or a good morning, depending on where you are watching this from. And with that, we are ready to sign out. So goodbye, everyone.
Good night. Good night.